Hi everybody and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight, brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis and Darley. Today, how many Group 1s does Australia have? Where to for the pattern? It's curtains for King Island racing for now and an extended chat with Hong Kong-based trainer David Eustace. In breeding, the 2-year-old sales start to take shape. We talked to Inglis Will Stott about Inglis's offering, plus the incredible legacy of Street Cry. And in wagering, the new man in charge of Entain in Australia, and sports takeover of wagering is not just a problem for Australian racing. Tim, welcome aboard. I'm giving you a whiteboard and a marker, and you have to write down the ideal number of Group 1s in Australia. What is that number?
So, two perspectives on this. As an owner, I'd love to win a Group 1, whether it's a legitimate one or a secondary Group 1. But as an observer of the industry, I think we have too many, 74, 76. So with you penned an article this week, cutting it down to 50, it was pretty brutal, but I think you can argue.
I'm a brutal man, Tim. I have to be brutal in this game. So
I do work for you, so I'm well aware of that. You can cut quite a few of them. I think the pattern from black type Group 1s we're talking about from a bloodstock valuation perspective, the market already does a pretty good job at valuing what is a super Group 1 for a better term, as opposed to those secondary ones, maybe without singling out some, an Oaks, for instance, different value. We've seen with, Australasian Oaks winner a couple of years ago, the Stern mare from First Light, the name escapes me, but, she sold for sort of 600,000.
A sweeve.
Yes, I couldn't pronounce it, so thank you for that. And, there's others that, we've seen with Imperatrice, 6.6 million, one, I think it was 10 Group 1s, but, you can see that the different valuation with Stallions as well if you win a Goodwood versus an Everest or a Coolmore and Golden Slipper. So in that sense, I think it already values them, and we can cut whether it should be an arbitrary number, 70, 60, 50, whatever, it devalues them with the Memsey. Great race on Saturday. Still would have been a great race as a Group 2. Treasure of the Moment was brilliant. I imagine she still would have used it as a great kick-off point, whether it was Group 1 or Group 2. So I don't think that devalues it in any way, really. That's where we're at.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because 50 was just a number that I took because it seemed like an arbitrary number. I'm not necessarily, it's not my necessarily position that this is what we should do. It was an argument's sake to say, if we go back to 50, what would it look like? And actually the response is pretty much like, yeah, I reckon that's pretty much about right in terms of the races we would have. Group 1 racing wouldn't commence under that schedule until sort of late September, but I don't have a problem with that. For a long time we didn't see Group 1 racing. We have these succession of lead-up races into later races in the spring as Group 1 winners, which is distorting history in terms of Group 1 records and all that type of stuff. Obviously, when the pattern was brought in internationally in the late 70s, there was a whole bunch of new records created and heroes created around that. Engagement was created about it. But if we keep on growing the Group 1s, the term becomes meaningless. And as you said, from a bloodstock point of view, I'm saying, don't get me wrong, I think black type definitely carries value and it definitely ascribes some value. But I think people know what the good Group 1s are and what aren't the good Group 1s, as you alluded to, Tim. And I think the concept of it's not really having its function then, is it, Tim, about where things sit? So I think, there definitely needs to be some reform. And I would say that 75 to 80% of support or people who responded to this article were in support of it. That is definitely something we should move towards, having a much more defined, refined Group 1 calendar, which, looks much more like the elite races where we're used to. And of course, some clubs and some states are going to lose Group 1s. Well, they all are going to lose Group 1s under my plan, but, I'm not saying my plan's eaten a bit, but then that would then flow on further down through the pattern. And as I said, it's all exercise and academics at the moment, Tim, because you know what? The pattern is still in disarray. As we found out this week, we had an update. No, we actually had no update in the pattern because Racing Australia didn't meet. Do you want to bring the listeners up to date with sort of what happened there, that intended Racing Australia board meeting this week?
Well, obviously, in some ways, the outcome was the same outcomes occurred because of the motion, there was going to be voted down anyway. So despite the meeting not going ahead, they haven't voted on it. So no change to the pattern as yet. So I think that was going to be the same outcome anyway. I believe the directors and the PRAs are still discussing trying to come to a resolution of where to take the pattern without using, the black type guidelines as I believe them to be, using purely rating, horse ratings numbers and race ratings to upgrade and downgrade, which obviously puts a lot of power in those better races. In New South Wales and Victoria obviously have more of those races, and so they can upgrade Russell Baldings and things like that, and then the lesser states could lose quite a few races. So, but trying to come to a compromise, as we said, multiple times on this podcast, and I can't see where that compromise comes at the moment. If the Racing Victoria and other PRAs back down, then Racing New South Wales presses ahead with what they want to achieve, and then Racing New South Wales perhaps have to back down to get some of their better races upgraded. I'm not sure where it ends up. Your guess is as good as mine.
It's a dysfunction that sits at the structure of Australian racing. It's remarkable we can actually run a racing industry given, the what's been explained to you and I on several occasions is this power of veto that Victoria and Racing New South Wales hold within Racing Australia is actually a net negative for the Australian industry. Yes, the powerful states, it's important that they have influence and whatever else, but the structure has got to be better. Like, goodness gracious me, Tim, it's 2025. There are 1,000 different governance structures out there we can work on, which would still fit within the global expectations of how we manage these things. It just, for me, it's a sign of, unless we can define a national interest about what we want racing to be, it becomes less and less irrelevant because you end up with 150 Group 1s and no one knowing anything about what it means, and we wonder why people can't engage with it. It's just absolutely frightening. The other challenge racing's got in Australia, of course, is at the lower end. We've got a story came out last week, which is extremely well read, about King Island racing being called off for the summer. Likelihood is that they may struggle to restart racing on King Island. It's only a very small, isolated Tasmanian island, but I think it tells us a bit more about the broader challenges around racing, and that race clubs around Australia are going to struggle. We've got Birdsville this week, and Birdsville's in a much healthier place, of course. Again, there's probably these race meetings aren't necessarily your big punting meetings that are going to, drive massive wagering returns for the PRAs, but they're enormously important for racing's hold within the community, Tim. And you and I are both kids that grew up in the country and that engage with racing from a country level. The ability for people to go to their local race meetings and attend these things and have that experience and be close to the horses and see the colour of movement of the betting rings and the mounting yards and all those type of stuff. That's for me, a really massive thing for racing.
Yeah, in King Island, they're tyranny of distance, but the water, the Bass Strait sort of can't get, it's not like trainers can go there and back and, every second week for a race meeting. So it makes it challenging. Even Birdsville, there's a lead up, there's Batuta and Baduri afterwards. And it is I think after COVID, there was a bit of a concern about Birdsville where it was at, but the committee seemed to have done a great job and nominations through the roof. This year, it seems like they've got some new sponsors, and I think a Cooper is behind a race on Friday, 40,000, makes it worthwhile. And, I haven't been to Birdsville yet, but I'm certainly on the bucket list. I'd like to do it one day. Not sure I'm a camper. I'll have to get one of those cabins, hopefully. But, I think the longer those meetings can be maintained, and with the PRAs, and I think it's in government's imperative as well to kick in, improve these, or make sure they keep going from a tourism perspective, because it does kick a lot of money into the economy. And obviously Birdsville is not much there, but the pub, probably survives off this weekend alone.
I urge you to have a read of Matt Stewart's brilliant article on the Straight put up today about Birdsville, about the three Keys brothers, who actually were raised on King Island, and Robert Keys still lives on King Island. Three trainers who are bringing their horses, but not based in different states, because Robert and John are technically both in Tasmania. One's in Hobart, one's in King Island, but also Ken from Cranbourne, all travelling up there for a bucket list trip. And doesn't that talk about racing? Isn't that a story you can tell about a bucket list item of people wanting to go to the races? But anyway, I think that for me, that's a key aspect of understanding the sort of culture of Australian racing. Tim, we caught up with David Eustace yesterday to have a chat through his plans. Hong Kong's a long way from both Birdsville and King Island, but it was great to catch up with Dave and talk to him about his plans ahead of his second season. And joining us now on Straight Talk is David Eustace, Group 1 winning trainer here in Australia, and now, of course, plying his trade successfully in Hong Kong. Second season of his tenure starts on Sunday. Tim, I'll give you the new ball. You and Dave spent a bit of time in Goodwood getting to know one another. Yeah, I'll let you go away with a new ball, Tim.
Thanks, Brent. I know Dave likes his cricket, so it's a nice lead-in. But Dave, you must have, one season into your training career in Hong Kong, you must have been, I imagine, very satisfied with the way it started. 36 winners, and I think above the first season average for a trainer in Hong Kong. So onwards and upwards from here.
Yeah, thanks, Rowe. Thanks for having me on. Hi, guys. Yeah, look, it certainly did exceed expectations. I think it's actually a place that's very hard to actually put any real markers in place. Your first season, which I sort of put a rough one of 20 to 30 winners, I'd have been satisfied with, just in that range, because you really just got no idea which horses are going to come into your stable, and that changes extremely quickly. So 20 horses at the start, which is, about average, probably a touch below, but I was keen to be patient with those. Knew that really the only way of getting more horses into the stable was by getting a few winners. And once I had run them, but there was really no pressure to run early or late, just when they're right, and did that. Thankfully, I waited till October and I think I had sort of 3 winners in my first 11 or 12 runners. So that was how I approached it. And thankfully, from there, like many first season trainers, no different with Mark and Jamie Richards, the previous 2 before me, they approached it differently, but had full stables by the end of the season. So I think, me having a full stable at the end of the first season is great, but certainly not unusual. If you can prove that you can train a bit early on to the local owners, they then support very quickly. So, and also you just get a lot of luck along the way. I got sent some horses that were really, some of my best horses are nothing to do with me sourcing them. And they arrived, and there was no way I was going to say no, because I'd had an empty barn, and particularly in Light Years Charm, he's turned out to be a really nice horse who progressed through the grades. So, anyway, you need some luck, but yeah, long and short of it, I was satisfied with the results, and hopefully we can kick on.
Yeah, obviously, placement's a big thing in Hong Kong, and handicaps determine obviously where you can take your races. So how confident are you that, this season you can make a strong start again in terms of getting horses that are in, winning marks, and they're in a position to actually, progress through their races relatively comfortably, as opposed to sort of having horses at the top of their marks you have to bring back again?
Yeah, it's an really interesting point, and probably the absolutely the crucial. It's the part of you, whether you're going to have a good season or a bad season, is how the horses are handicapped. I think the horses that did a lot of winning for me last year, reality is that they're probably going to find it tough, and I'm very, very aware of that. I think luckily I've got still a young team of horses. I had a group of 15 to 20 horses that carried the can last year, and they've had a break. They won't be racing really early on, apart from Light Years Charm, who hopefully is the progressive one. And the horses that went from, say, class 5 into 4 or 4 into 3, the reality is most horses don't progress 2 classes. And so I've got a young stable, who I didn't sort of pepper with too many runs at the end of last year. Now, I knew they were going to be my team for this season, so I didn't want to either run unnecessarily or wanted to make use of their handicap this time round. So it won't be a fast start, because the older horses have had a break and are just coming back again now and probably racing mid-October. And the young horses, they are still getting going. So I'll probably average 3 or 4 runners per meeting through September, I would think, and then start to kick in October, which I think is fine. I think given when a horse trials this time of year, it's they really know they've had a trial. It's pretty warm at the moment, and the humidity is extremely high. So I didn't want to sort of put too much pressure on. But with the better horses, you're guided by the program. Victor the winner runs on Sunday because he's 111 and needs to run. Light Years Charm runs at the end of the month to kick off his season. But yeah, I'm hopeful that we can progress even with the older horses that some will be at the top of their mark.
As you just said, I think the 4 runners entered for Sunday. How have you sort of prepped up on how do you manage the preparation between seasons? And I think the track's shut for a couple of weeks at least, and manage their preparations.
Yeah, that's obviously a challenge and something that I'm very much learning about now. First off season, horses don't go to the paddock, so they're always kept moving. As you touch on, the track shuts for 2 weeks at Shartin, which is absolutely fine. The horses will, minimum have that sort of break. But if they then run on the last day of the season, let's say, and are to run on the first day of the season, 2 weeks they probably wouldn't want any more than that. Anyway, we do have the luxury of Chungfa now, which is a fantastic facility. It's in mainland China, but 3 hours north of Shartin, but it's essentially a replica of Shartin. But the racetrack itself is a training track, so we have access to a lot of grass to gallop on. Most of the horses that are racing for the first 2-3 weeks, I would suggest the majority would have prepped up there, and the main track does shut, but the trotting rings stay open, so they can keep moving the horses if you wish. So Victor the winner, older horse, he didn't have too long off. I gave him a couple of weeks up in Chungfa, can go to the grass paddocks and work, and he's had just the one trial here at Shartin. I think he's going very well, but he's towards the back end of his career. It's a race where a lot of horses have targeted because they're good horses are going to be carrying the minimum, and King Rising has got to carry 135 pounds and give 20 pounds to every horse in the field, pretty much, apart from Lucky Sweyness. So for us, who are trying to, topple the champ or just run well and run for good prize money, at least getting 20 pounds off him is a big plus. Honestly, I think the horse King Rising is an absolute champion, and really I hope he wins and goes to Australia and proves that to everyone too, because I really do believe he is. But the other 3 runners are in good form, and I run a nice horse called Sunset Trail. He's had 1 run, drawn well in the Class 4 1400 Zach Purton rides, and I think he'll have a good chance.
Have you gone about building your stable in terms of new stock, Dave? I mean, have you been buying yearlings or 2-year-olds or PPs and PPGs? Are you looking to Australia and New Zealand or looking to Europe? How have you sort of worked out that plan of bringing the next generation of horses along there, sort of drive your stables the next few years?
Well, I think you have to be very open-minded. For me, a good horse can come from anywhere, but as we all know, but by the same token, you have to respect the horses that have worked here and the training set up and the style of training. We have trials, we race on firm tracks. Shartin is very similar to, say, Randwick without the rise, or Flemington, and Happy Valley is unique, but it's not totally unlike a Moonee Valley track, but racing the other way. So I would say the majority of horses have come from Australia, but Australia, New Zealand, England and Ireland are the obvious spots I would like to explore a little bit further afield in the future. I think America is interesting. I think the style of horse, his physique really suits Hong Kong, and they do train on dirt, and they're dirt bred, and we do the same here. But yeah, largely Australia. I mean, the way I work at I've got two agents looking in the Southern Hemisphere and 2 in the North, and we discuss things, at length, and PPGs and PPs. What you want is a balance of both, really, so that you have horses coming in at different classes, because here in Hong Kong, regardless of a horse's rating or ability, you can only have 1 runner in each race as a trainer if it's a full field. So if I've got 2 runners in a race that are rated higher than David Hayes, let's say, David's horse will get priority over my second runner, even if it's rated higher than him. So you need a balance. John Size has got the strongest stable in depth, without doubt. And obviously on the top end, the fields are not necessarily always full, but if John didn't have horses in class 4 or class 5, he just simply wouldn't have runners in those races. So yeah, sourcing horses in both, and depending on what owners prefer to.
Interesting what you say about America, Dave. I spoke to Craig Groundsfell, Boomer Bloodstock earlier, and he's heading over to the Keeneland sales next week, as he always does for different clients, but also he mentioned Hong Kong Jockey Club looking for a few horses. I don't think they've been that active there in recent years, so be interesting to see if they can find the right horse to bring back to their international sale, in a couple of years' time.
Yeah, and I think for me that it makes a lot of sense. I actually went to America before coming to Hong Kong because 90% of our training is on dirt, and so it's about 10 to 15% of racing. And I just think the style of horse when I was there, it struck me that you do need. It's not all about size and weight, but just with the style of training and racing here, where horses are in work for 10, if not 11 months of the year, they just need to be horses that carry condition. They don't have to necessarily be a certain height or a certain weight, but if they have got some strength about them, I think it's very important. So, American horses, largely that's sort of bred into them, and you certainly have the dirt breed, which has to help too. So I think that would be really, really interesting to see what comes of it.
And with training with Kieran, obviously a lot of different facilities, different states, farms and training tracks and beaches and so forth. Has it taken much of an adjustment to train basically from a Sha Tin and bit of Chong Fa to what you were doing when you were with Kieran?
To be honest, I think even though the style of training's different, one is with Kieran, you saw the massive benefit of changing the scenery of a horse if they're not suiting a particular environment. And although Sha Tin and Chung Fa, the setups are similar, just the environment itself are very different. Sha Tin's an intense place. There's more horses. It's busier. Probably just spread across a smaller, piece of land. Whereas Chung Fa is quieter, bigger, less horses, and in turn makes it much more relaxed. So just being able to do that and see the benefits of of horses changing scenery is a big help. And also with Kieran, ultimately we started our Caulfield training on a track, and that style of training never left the business, never left the training. So, the style and how we sort of prepped horses up at Caulfield is really how I've sort of adopted it. Sha Tin, of course, you've got to adapt. So I think it just stood me in good stead.
Yeah, I mean, Kieran invested a lot in data and technology and equine sports science. I mean, have you brought that to your approach over there, Dave, in terms of how transferable is what happens and how things are measured in Australia compared to what goes on in a Hong Kong environment?
Yeah, it's actually very transferable, and it's something that I use on a daily basis. Every horse that does any fast work, they're the same devices used. We use an echometra here, which is provided by the club, which is fantastic. And I've actually found it a huge benefit because the variables are less. You're training on the same track, which is generally in the same condition. Your riders don't vary that much. And for about 9 months of the year, the track is prepared exactly the same. So, for us, it's about here in particular, which of course is sort of the case across the board, but particularly here, it's about having a horse's fitness at the right level and not training unnecessarily. Horses have got to race ideally consistent for 10 months, which is pretty unusual. Apart from Singapore, which is now closed, I don't know any other place in the world where the horses are asked to do that. America, they might race fairly regularly for 3 months of a meet and then have a break. England, they wouldn't even race for that long, and Australia, they certainly wouldn't. So, galloping a horse if they don't need to gallop here is really going to be to the detriment of you. So it's been a massive help bringing them back, having had a break and seeing where their fitness levels are at. And, at times quite remarkable to see how well they sort of hold their fitness and how little they need before, say, going into a trial and then going into the race. So it's been a big help.
We often hear in Hong Kong the importance of a relationship with owners and developing relationships with owners and managing those things. How have you gone with that? I mean, obviously, it's also an environment where, punting's very much at the heart of people what do. People want to hear if their horse is going to go well. How have you balanced those relationships? How do you make sure that you're getting the right message across to people that, a lot of them you've only met in the last 12 months. How do you feel like you're trying to they've built their trust in you and what you're doing, Dave?
Well, a lot of it, there's no doubt, is quite a, building a relationship quicker in any business, I suppose. Is an industry is face to face, which happens a lot more here. It's a very obvious point, but when you get here, you realise that every owner is within half an hour radius of you. So naturally, there's just going to be more meetings that are actually done in person, which I like. And you can obviously get how you are across that much quicker than when it's over the phone or a video or an audio. So, I try and keep the communication as crystal clear as possible and be, you're an open book. Obviously, it's challenging at times. Horses naturally run poorly, and that's the reality of racing. But I've found the owners extremely, good to deal with, very supportive in the last season, and they're very, as you say, passionate about their racing. Of course, they like a bet, and with it being a handicap system here, every horse has a chance, and you have to see big price winners all the time. So that buoys everyone's confidence going into a race. And, they know they're racing well. They've been involved in it for a long time. They know their tracks and they know their jockeys. So I found, they have a positive opinion on things, and it needs to be respected, particularly for someone who's only arrived in the last year or so.
And during the off-season, Dave, did you get a chance to get away and get home? Well, I know you did in the UK and Europe, and see the family and sort of just take a little bit of a break. It's never complete 100% switch off in racing, I know, but just to switch off and debrief.
Yeah, well, I think that's where we're very fortunate, in Hong Kong, and the fact that we stopped racing for 7 weeks, track shuts complete for 2 weeks. It's an intense sort of 10 months or whatever it may be, with racing being on a Sunday here, you really don't have a day off. That's racing anyway, of course, but it's quite scrutinized throughout the season too. So to be able to do that, I think any trainer, any jockey, any racing participant would welcome some sort of break, and you really feel that you're champing at the bit when you do decide to come back. So yeah, I had 10 days Italy, 2 weeks at home, caught up with family and friends, and first time I've been able to do that for some time over an extended period. So it really was, it was fantastic.
We're likely to see, obviously, Brett Crawford's got his first runner on Sunday. We've got James Cummings coming to Hong Kong next year. Obviously, it's good to see new faces coming in, obviously, rival trainers. What's your sort of perspective of, James has got a 12-month run in, effectively, to sort of build up what he wants to do before he goes in. I know you're probably not going to start firing bullets towards James as yet, but, I mean, that would give him a distinct advantage in terms of building his stable sort of going forward and making sure that he's sort of, gets his head across everything needs to be sort of understood. I mean, would you have liked to have that sort of longer period of running into your first season, Dave?
Yeah, look, I think I had, plenty long enough. I finished up with Kieran at the end of January. It was announced over Christmas. So, essentially had 8-9 months leading in. I've caught up with James, messaged him and said, if you need anything, let me know. And I'm sure we'll catch up plenty leading into the season. Sure, it's a bit of an advantage, but I don't, sort of see it that way. I think it just allows him to, thoroughly plan. But whether it's 6 months or 12 months or 9 months, I'm not sure it has, too much bearing on it. Brett's settled in great, lovely fella, trained a lot of winners in South Africa. He's got a great chance on Sunday. I hope the horse wins. And we all know how, competitive it is, but by the same token, no one wants to see. So there's plenty of pie to share around, and he's got a nice small team to begin with, and I've no doubt that will grow. So, best of luck to them, honestly. And I'm sure James will be a, great success, train a lot of winners. He's young, and I commend the club that they're, really looking to target young, sort of upwardly mobile trainers, because in racing here is no different to anywhere else. in the world. It obviously relies on those owners that have been involved for a long time and probably carry that sort of wealth to invest again. But, we need young owners to bring the game through here in Hong Kong, and probably the ownership here is pretty aging. So if some young trainers can sort of kick that lot along a bit, that's only going to benefit everyone.
Dave, I think we'll leave it there. But we thank you very much for coming on the Straight Talk podcast. Yeah, wish you best of luck for the new season and continue to charge up the Trainers Premiership.
Cheers, Ray. Thanks, Brent. Thanks for having me on.
The following segment is brought to you by Darley. We've talked about emerging stallions. Now let me throw another one into the mix. Native Trail. Breeders couldn't stop calling him the best-looking stallion on the Darley roster. And that's on top of being a champion 2-year-old and a classic winner at 3. The scary part? His foals are just as sharp-looking as he is. Like Too Darn Hot all over again, but with his own twist. Native Trail has the looks, the race record, and now the foals to back it up. He is staring you right in the face. Native Trail, standing at Darley Calvin's side for $27,500. On to breeding and bloodstock now, Tim, and we'll have a chat with Will Stott in a minute, but the 2-year-old sales season is certainly building up nicely. And look, it's really interesting to see that level of enthusiasm from vendors to put horses on the market has really exploded, particularly in New Zealand, Jim. That sale seems to be going pretty well at the moment and has got a lot of momentum behind it, but Inglis and Magic Millions also putting out their catalogues as well. Yeah, there's certainly plenty on offer there for any buyers in that market.
Yeah, NZB have sort of led the way, certainly in numbers and volume, for a long time. And Inglis and Magic Millions for a period sort of probably took market share and have really become quite competitive. But the last few years, NZB have done a great job getting Hong Kong buyers, in particular down there. Just getting trainers, but also some big owners that have, people are impulsive. If you're at an auction and you're there to spend or to buy a horse, it's hard to say no and hard to keep your hand down, particularly if you're wealthy enough where a budget doesn't really come into the equation. And so they've done a great job there. And it's more importantly, the graduate success, 10 Group 1 winners in Australia too, importantly. So it is, becoming the Australian buyers are targeting it as well to get nice 3-year-olds, Derby and Oaks horses and just horses that train on at 4. And, it's not a bad way to do it. You sort of, 9 months ahead of the curve compared to yearling sales and can see them gallop. And so 480 horses, a few new vendors there at NZB, and I'm sure it'll be a great sale again.
Yeah, and of course, Magic Millions and Inglis as well. And we caught up with Inglis's Will Stott. And joining us now is Will Stott from Inglis, the bloodstock sales manager. Will, we've had the Ready to Race sale catalogue come out last week. All 3 companies put out their sale catalogues and 885 lots to be offered across all 3 sales companies. What do you put? That's 12% up on last year. What do you put the sort of the surge in interest in people offering their 2-year-olds down to?
G'day, Bren and Tim. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, how the numbers have risen over the last few years. It's a different market. It's certainly not an easy market to sell horses into, but it can be hugely lucrative if it's done well. And we saw that last year with the results, particularly at our sale. Selling Signature Scent for $1 million from the Baystone draft was an incredibly amazing result. And, you see these vendors investing a lot coming into our yearling sales, finding the right horses that they want to buy to re-offer at the Breeze Up sale in October, and seeing the rise in the quality of stock that they're buying over the last few years is hugely exciting. And, credit to the way this platform is sort of developing and the way, we're selling these horses now.
Will, the Breeze Ups for the English sale are about 4 weeks away, New Zealand, Victoria and New South Wales. The vendors or the appeal of the vendors who are educating these horses such a pivotal part. How are they prepping up, and what are you seeing and hearing from these vendors, how the horses are going, and, what are you expecting in, 4 weeks' time?
Yeah, so it's not far away, Tim. We've catalogued 224 horses. 145 of those were purchased out of the yearling sales this year, majority of them from the English sales. It's interesting to see sort of the rise in the average price of those yearlings that have been bought over the last few years. So in 2023, the average yearling price of horses bought for the Breeze Up sale was 74,000. In 24, it rose to 96,000. And this year it's risen again to 97,000 with the median of 80,000. So that sort of shows the quality of bloodstock that these preparers are investing in to go and reoffer at our sales. And yeah, it's a hugely exciting catalogue, being well supported by a number of different vendors across the country and from New Zealand as well.
In terms of the scheduling of the sale, Will, that's October 16th. It's now a couple of days ahead of the Everest in Sydney at a time of year where people are really excited about racing, and obviously the buzz this has created around that. I mean, obviously there's a marketing angle there for Inglis to work, naturally hand in hand with what's going on at the Everest or whatever else. I mean, how cognizant of you guys were in terms of pulling that together, and and when you talk to vendors and you talk to buyers and you talk to people, is there a sense of greater connection there?
Yeah, well, we sort of talked about it this year, and we figured we'd push the sale back to the Thursday with the proximity of the $20 million Everest. Why not have it then, particularly with the chance of King rising and him coming out here, and the interest from Hong Kong buyers in the sale. It's an incredibly exciting time to be in Sydney, and we figured why not have it a couple of days before while they're all here, and they can all be there and enjoy it.
We speak of the Hong Kong buyers; they are pivotal to the market, or all 3 2-year-old sales. Getting all those trainers and owners and agents down. But the domestic market too is vital to the success of the sale. How are you expecting that segment of the market to hold up, given the yearling sales have been a little bit tougher?
Tim, I think as we sort of discussed, the top end of the market's incredibly strong, and looking at those figures of what these preparers are buying these horses for now, they're buying nice yearlings to sell into the top market. You look at our graduates here in this country in Libertad, Democracy Manifest, Straight Acer, Latoya, like a number of proper stakes winning horses that have won nearly $1 million in prize money. And it's very easy to sell horses being prepared for breeze ups to the local market now as well. Similarly for Hong Kong, we've got Ruby Lot, who's now Group 1 placed over there. He's a very exciting prospect. So yeah, there's appeal to the international market as well as the local market.
Obviously, we've seen a bit of a change around the order of the 2-year-old sales this year. Of Magic Millions are going a week before you guys. New Zealand's obviously later on. Inglis has got its spot, as you mentioned before, strategically placed around that time of year. In terms of how you try to attract international buyers, Will, and making sure that they can get here, all that sort of stuff, how have you worked on that? And are you sort of confident that those Hong Kong and Malaysian buyers and those other buyers who come from overseas to really support and drive this sale, they're all going to be on board?
Yeah, well, Bren, we're certainly conscious of the timing to suit those buyers and them getting here. Obviously, they've got a lot of horses in work back at home, and we're conscious of them being able to spend time here. And that was the idea around having the sale so close to the Everest, particularly with King rising. Like, it's very exciting for the owners in him, but equally, it can be invigorating for other owners to come and see that, if they're here, and hopefully encourage them to invest.
Terrific, Will. Thanks so much for your time, and all the best for the sale.
Thank you, guys.
While we're in the mood of talking about sales, Tim, Keeneland's September sale, the largest yearling sale on the planet. It is. I've never been to Keeneland. I don't want to do, 10 days of yearling sale, Tim? I'm not too sure if I want to do 10 days of yearling sale. I don't think I'm quite up for that. But it is quite a remarkable sale, and we're expecting very big things in there, given everything that's going on in America at the moment.
Yeah, there's a few Aussies going over. Brad Widdop for Mulberry Racing have got a slot in the Everest, and they've got Jetabil running on Saturday in Concord, I think. Don't think he's going to run in the Moya. They've got 6 horses in training over there already, and Brad's going back over, sort of as a, those that know Brad, he doesn't talk himself up too much. He lets the horses do the talking, and he sort of as an overseer, as he sort of joked, just to make sure the horses have got 4 legs and a tail, on the list. But, Mulberry Racing, Mike Gregg, successful Sydney businessman, he said they've got a lot of horses with Brad, and they've got 6 in the States, and they're going back to have another look. Craig Rounsfield's gone over as he always does, and interesting looking for the Hong Kong Jockey Club, as we touched on with Dave Eustace. I'm not sure there'll be too much Aussie action, but there'll be certainly with the Aussie dollar sort of making it challenging. But overall, it'll be a great barometer for the American bloodstock market because there's 4,500 yearlings. And, Saratoga was super strong early last month. So I'm sure that'll continue, particularly at the top end.
Yeah, and there's certainly just the bullishness in that American market at the moment, driven by a bit of well-timed publicity to the Netflix series and a helpful bit of government legislation as well. So interesting time for that. Before we go away from the bloodstock and breeding space, I wanted to touch on the continued remarkable impact of Street Cry as a stallion broodmare size of influence in Australia. And it is quite extraordinary. Tim, you covered off the other day with Treasure of the Moment, of course, being out of a Street Cry mare, and Michael Donahue bought the horse.
Michael Donahue, yep.
Yeah, bought the horse for Yulong, or bought the dam for Yulong out of the US. But it's just amazing to look at the horses that he's got, that it influenced that he's had. As I said, the latest one being the superstar Treasure of the Moment but if you look at the champion 3-year-old filly of the year, which is Treasure of the Moment, champion 3-year-old colt gelding of the year, broadsiding, and champion sprinter of the year, Bella Nipotina, have all got Street Cry in the first two lines of their pedigree. Talk about being undersold and underrepresented. Dane Hill did an extraordinary job in Australia and has been talked rightly as such an amazing breed shaper. But in terms of champion horses, if you look at Street Cry's record, I was just going back to a story I wrote a little while ago, and this might have been updated since then. But Winks won 4 Cox Plates. Animo, who's descended from Street Cry, won a Cox Plate. Romantic Warrior has got Street Cry blood, won a Cox Plate. Talk about our best races, our best horses. Pride of Jenny, Bella Nipotina, as I mentioned. I mean, it's quite a extraordinary legacy that doesn't necessarily show any signs of slowing, Tim, because the amount of Street Cry mares in particular just continue to sort of come through and keep providing really star top-level horses.
I'm tipping there's one going to be quite valuable at Easter next year, Bren, out of the Street Cry mare by Schnitzels. I think her name's called Winks, so it'd be interesting to see what that colt can go for. A fair bit going for him by a champion stallion out of as we all know, a champion mare by Street Cry.
Yeah, and it just, that it's interesting. We do live in a global pedigree world, and you look at Street Cries, go back through his history, have a look through the sort of staggered start he had within Australia and the impact he was able to make once. Obviously, Winks is a once-in-a-lifetime horse, an extraordinary horse, but far beyond Winks in terms of Street Cry's legacy. And these good horses. Treasure of the Moment. I mean, I'm not saying she's in the same sentence as Winks, but she might be in the same postcode. She could be an absolute star, this horse, and it's just great to see good horses coming through. This is why we love the early part of spring when we see these horses coming through. Moving on to wagering space, Tim, and had a good chat with Andrew Vuris, the new CEO of Entain Australia and New Zealand last week. That article's on the Straight, was published on Wednesday. Have a look through. Interesting profile of a man who's probably came in with a reputation of being the compliance guy to get things sort of sorted out at Entain, given the Austrac investigation and other challenges that they've got there. But I think beyond that, Andrew's got a real determination to continue to press and develop Entain and keep them moving, albeit in a different game plan. The win but not at all cost mentality. It's written above his office door that's the way he's thinking about things. But they're a big player within Australia, 17% of the digital market, third biggest player in the Australian market. Their ongoing presence in this market has been a source of debate for some time, but he's adamant that Entain will remain in Australia. They've obviously got a very important and massive influence in New Zealand as well. Yeah, it'll be a fascinating story over the next 12 months to see where things are heading forward. But for the sake of New Zealand racing, the relationship with Entain and NZ will be absolutely crucial to to New Zealand racing continuing on that sort of upward trajectory they've taken since that deal came in 2023, Tim. The other thing I wanted to bring up today too was the Mixie points bet fight. I had a message the other day from an internal source within one of the teams saying the war is over. We'll wait and see on that one, but Mixie now have over 50% of points bet, which puts them in a very strong position, albeit I think at last count, Benar had 28%, 27%. So look, it's down to a two-person slog, and we'll find out what goes in there. The other thing I wanted to sort of talk to you about, Tim, stats came out from Hong Kong Jockey Club this week. Now, since 2021, football has been a bigger wagering source of turnover for the Hong Kong Jockey Club than racing. Hong Kong Jockey Club are the licensed gambling wagering provider in Hong Kong. So they basically take that market. $170 billion in turnover, I think, compared to $140 billion for racing. What also was significant in my perspective is that the amount of money being returned back to the government through, effectively betting taxes is now more for football/soccer than it is for racing. We've seen, going back to PointsBet, they're very much getting towards that sports skew. We've seen sports betting growing and growing within Australia. We've talked about how there is some complementary relationship with horse racing. But globally, should racing be worried about this, Tim? And we've got a jockey club who's actually growing this and now about to move into basketball as well in the Hong Kong Jockey Club in terms of betting. Should racing be worried about this globally, do you think? About the absolute supercharge of sports betting?
Well, from a jockey club perspective, through the way they market, I would look. And some have already made this point, internationally. I see it as an entry point for gambling. If you're interested in gambling, it's obviously easier to pick your own football team, whatever code that is, or basketball, whatever sport. Racing is inherently more complicated, a lot more outcomes. Obviously, strike rate goes down generally. Hopefully, as if you're 18 to 25 and then all of a sudden you're captivated by gambling and the racing element of it being more complicated could, I see it as a positive if it's managed the right way. And as, I think Sportsbet have said, and a lot of the corporates have said, they are the marketers for the racing industry. So they need, the PRAs need, and jockey clubs, they need the bookmakers on side to market racing for them to those sports punters. And so as long as they keep doing that, and there's an incentive for the bookmakers to keep doing that. And I note in your article, an interview with Andrew Voris, that he I wasn't discreet, he was making the point that taxes make it there is less incentive to market for racing because of the high taxes. So I think there is a tipping point there, and hopefully those sports punters can be enticed across to racing at some point. And just how they do it, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, I think probably the corporate bookmakers' perspective, there was a time there where they didn't contribute as much as they contribute now, but now they're contributing around 57% of revenue to fees, whether it be taxes, race fees, whatever else. Whether that's right or not, I'm not too sure. Like, I'm not an economist, but it seems to me that from their perspective, that is becoming a very difficult margin-wise. They're obviously passing on those costs back to the punter. And sport is much cheaper to operate on. A conversation I had with Andrew Vuris, which was pretty much, racing has a challenge because it's much more expensive to operate, and there's more fees on it, and it doesn't have the social license that sport has. So there is a challenge there if it does flip, and it could flip within Australia over the next 5 to 10 years, where we see more than 50% of turnover in Australia on sport. That may change if the federal government bring in their wagering legislation/advertising restrictions, but we just have to wait and see, I suppose. But one thing's for sure, racing can't stand here and twiddle its thumbs on this. I will applaud the Hong Kong Jockey Club because they are continually trying to improve the racing experience. They've got this amazing immersive experience, digital experience now. They're setting up what's called a pony club within the race course now, which is effectively for kids to go to and not be exposed to the gambling elements and all that type of stuff, to bring them into racing, to introduce it to them and understand what it's about. I think racing in Australia needs to have a very strong look at that and the pathways for people to come through. Because as you said before, bookmakers have done a great job of marketing racing for their own purposes, but the challenge is they can't market by law and absolutely by social design to kids growing up. Hey, you would go back to you and I growing up as kids, Tim. I mean, yes, of course, betting was a part of it, betting as a young lad, but being attached to, seeing the horses, understanding the colour and movement, getting to realise that in a world which there's a lot of artificial things going on, and there's a lot of things going on, when you go to a racetrack and you see the connection between human and horse, you see all the people and the care that goes into those, you see the way that the jockeys handle the horses, all those things. It's a point of difference. It's something, in my perspective, that racing needs to push out more and more. All right, enough of me. I'll get off my pulpit and we will move on now. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by our fabulous sponsors, Inglis and Darling. Thanks for their support ongoing. Don't forget to send us an email. Yeah, straight answers. We're happy to answer your questions and have a chat about anything you want. Send an email to editor@thestraight.com.au. If you're interested in advertising with us in any way or form, including on this podcast, please send an email to partnerships@thestraight.com.au and express your interest. We'd be happy to talk to you around that. Yeah, don't forget, give us a rating wherever you listen to us on this podcast, be it through all the various platforms we're on, and we'll talk to you again next week.